Live and direct, live and a date, no jive.
Legalize it.
Tell me how much can a koala bear? Koala bear, koala bear. Koala bear. Barry pulls a joint out of his pocket. Bill says, "Great, Barry, a reefer."
You don't think of edible pot. People think of pot as just like, oh, you're going to get high. Maybe you can get too high, but you're just getting high.
Yes.
But when you eat it, it's a completely different animal.
Yeah.
Literally, like physiologically, it's a different animal.
Really?
Yeah, it creates something called 11-hydroxy metabolite. It's 5 times more psychoactive than THC. And
What?
It's like not even psychoactive in smoking it.
Yes.
It's a different drug. That's
It does feel different.
It's a totally different drug.
That makes complete sense.
Yeah, it's a different drug. It's processed by your liver.
Yes.
Wow.
There's something called the one pass. It passes through your liver, and the THC gets processed into 11-hydroxy metabolite.
Okay.
You should Google it. It's trippy shit. Way stronger. Way
I
stronger.
got some microdose versions of mushrooms that I've had 2 of them, and it was great. It just made things a little bit brighter.
It makes it nice.
Have you ever microdosed?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I'm on this new drug. It's called cheeseburger use, and I just take a little bit every day.
Whoa.
Yeah, a lot. I know a lot of people that do that.
Yeah.
A lot, like dozens of people who microdose, including fighters. I know a lot of fighters who microdose.
Yeah, I
They say it
forgot
helps
that
their
I
performance.
was even on any. I was just like, oh, this room looks like cooler.
Yeah, you just
I
feel
was like,
better.
oh yeah, I ate that little piece.
Yeah, you just feel a little better.
And welcome back to the Koala podcast, our first for 2024. And you probably want to know what you've just been listening to before we start the show. That was Blues Burger. You can find it for free on Bandcamp. Fantastic album, sort of DJ Shadow style, samples, clips, etc. All about cannabis. That track was called Up in Smoke. Okay, who have we got for you on the show this week? We've got Lauren Mendelsohn, who's just been promoted to partner at the law offices of Omar Figueroa. Lauren, welcome to the Koala podcast. You've just been promoted to partner at the firm. Congratulations. Do you want to tell us what yourself and Omar do? And apparently, I've just learned from you, you've got a New York office as well. So we can see what you do in New York as well. I presume that only opened in the last 6 months or so.
Well, thanks for having me, Sean. It's wonderful to be here and talk with all your listeners. The New York office we opened, it's been about a year, maybe even a little more. So it's doing well. My colleague Andrew Kingsdale, as you mentioned, is working with our clients in New York, and Omar and I are serving our clients in California. And so, again, my name is Lauren Mendelsohn, for those of you who are just meeting me for the first time, and I'm the junior partner at the law offices of Omar Figueroa. And we are a boutique cannabis, hemp, and psychedelics firm. We also serve clients in other craft and emerging industries. And we based in Northern California, but as mentioned, we serve clients all throughout California and also in New York. And we work with both businesses and individuals, large and small, from all parts of the supply chain in terms of cannabis operations, as well as employees and investors, and even nonprofits and local governments that are interested in learning more and crafting their policies. So we really have a wide range of clients that we work with and projects that we work on. We are very much involved in the regulatory process in interacting with the state agencies and at the local level in local advocacy work. I am on the board of directors of the Sonoma County Cannabis Alliance, and I'm also on the board of directors of California NORML, which has been around for over 50 years, advocating for the rights of cannabis consumers broadly, mostly at the state level, and have been some really great opportunities to do lobbying with those groups. And I really advocacy work and policy is why I decided to become a lawyer in the first place. I
So, I
think
mean, you've
it's,
been working for Omar for a number of years now. Did you
yeah, I
come from
have, yes.
did you come from another firm, or did you, I mean, what were you doing prior to working with Omar?
I was in law school. So this was I started working for Omar straight out of law school. And it really was why I decided to go to law school in the first place and to pursue a career in law was because I was active in the drug policy reform movement in college. And I really wanted to use the a law degree to bring about policy change and to fight for policies that I felt were right and to fight against policies that I felt were wrong.
You must be one
And
of the
what
first people to have come straight out of law school to work for a cannabis firm and become a partner. You may well actually be, as far as I'm aware, the first person in the US who has specifically come in as a cannabis lawyer and become a partner at a law firm. So I think from my knowledge over 10 years now, I think that might well be the case. So congratulations.
Well, thank you very much. That might be true. When folks ask how long I've been practicing cannabis law, I like to say for my entire career, because it's true. I have been doing it my entire. And even when I was in law school, I was clerking at firms as a law student. I was helping them start their cannabis business practice group, and that was before Prop 64 had even passed, when it was still in medical collective days. And so I was very much involved in this. And so now having an opportunity to work with and to represent some of these champions of the medical movement that I remember reading about, in case law as a student and as a young lawyer, and now I'm working with them. It's just really wonderful to be able to work with these types of clients. I really believe in the cause. I'm a medical patient myself. I'm not afraid to say that. Part of the reason that I went to law school in California, I grew up on the East Coast. I wanted access to medical cannabis, and I feel like I didn't want to be a criminal and breaking the law to access what was, I felt, just medicine that I should be able to access just like any other medication and go about my day. And so I do really appreciate the medical benefits of the plant, as well as just the need to normalize it on a recreational basis, considering how we have all, various other substances that are accepted and even glorified that have far worse societal impacts than cannabis. I'm here in wine country, and there's quite a bit of hypocrisy up here when it comes to how they view wine and how they view cannabis, considering how many DUIs there are here and all these other things that no one really wants to talk about.
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, maybe I wanted to ask you, some of the wider issues you think are coming up in California this year and then locally, but you've actually just touched on something that, seems to be becoming one of the big issues. It's almost going back in time, but it seems to be that one of the big issues of 2024 is DUI. I think this is the third conversation I've had in the last 6 weeks on the podcast, where we've spent most of the time talking about DUI, simply because there's technology that can't analyze properly. There's DREs who probably haven't been trained to some sort of standard. And I'd be very interested. So I was talking to a lawyer in New Jersey about all the issues on the East Coast. I mean, maybe we could start by some of your general thoughts about DUI and cannabis, and then, because you're saying you're also practicing in psychedelics, whether you've come across any issues with regard to people using psychedelics and driving. I mean, most hopefully aren't getting in the car after using psychedelics, but human beings don't always think very clearly. So I think this will be an issue upcoming, in Oregon, in Washington, and in California over the next 18 months. What are you seeing so far, and what are your thoughts on these issues moving forward?
Well, it's certainly something that we can't ignore. I'm not, it's important to take a look at the data, and you can see whether or not there's been an increase in DUIs after different states have legalized. I'm not sure if the data supports that or not, but in the context of me advising my clients, this is something that is very relevant when you're talking about consumption lounges, for example. Consumption lounges, if they are serving or allowing someone to consume there, and then that person goes and they get in an accident, there's potential liability for that lounge. And so we're seeing how that's going to play out legally, whether or not their states are going to build in any kind of protections.
Well, I was wondering if they would build anything into the legislation. So in Australia, for example, I mean, and I think in certain jurisdictions in the US as well, the equivalent of booze buses. So if you have a pub in the country, they have to have some sort of transport to get people home. I mean, has that been written into any of the draft legislation?
It's not. So that's a best practice. That's what I advise, my lounge clients, that they should have these practices in place, these safety measures in place. They should have liability waivers in place. They should have plenty of water. They should have training for their staff to see when someone is over intoxicated and what that looks like. The science is always evolving. And so that there's a number of steps you can take, precautions you can take. You can get special insurance for this to mitigate the risk to you as a business. But it's really just important for society in general and for the industry, so that we
self-regulation is the key.
Exactly. We need to hold ourselves to this higher standard, even if it's the legislation doesn't require it yet. It doesn't mean that these businesses shouldn't be putting them in place. And so the smart ones are. And I do think that over time you will see the regulations evolve to require those operations to have those protocols in place.
And what are your views on the level of technology with regard to DUI, specifically with cannabis? Because I think we're way too ahead of the game to even think about psychedelics at the moment. I mean, this has been, for me, a discussion that I've now come across a lot over the last few months, and it seems there is a huge amount of catch up. A lot of police departments, and this is not just in the US but also around the world, have been buying in technology that really is almost placebo technology in terms of being able to analyze cannabis and the way that it affects driving.
Well, that sounds like it very well could be true. I'm not up to speed on the latest in terms of the. I will take a moment to talk about a new law in California that's relevant to employee drug testing, and that drug testing technology has actually evolved quite significantly over the past few years. And so now it is, in the past, when you would test for cannabis, the tests would show up positive if you've smoked anywhere in the last 30 days, roughly. And so that is not a good measure of whether or not someone is intoxicated, has consumed even remotely recently. However, in the past few years, they have developed more accurate studies that actually can detect the active metabolites, meaning that they can basically tell if you smoked in the last 12 hours or so. And so there's certain types of oral swabs and blood tests that only test for these active metabolites. And so because of that, the state of California has enacted a new law as of January 1st that employers from discriminating against an employee or potential employee, not hiring them or firing them or taking some other action because they test positive, unless it's one of those tests that shows it was actively in their system.
And does that legislation stipulate what testing products are used yet?
On the market, and I do want to note it of course an employer can still have a drug-free workplace policy, and so if you can't be consuming on the job, obviously you can't be visibly intoxicated, but you can no longer be terminated for smoking 2 weeks ago. And employers can't even ask potential employees about their past cannabis use when they're being interviewed. That's also part of the new law. So these are some new protections that are going into place for cannabis users in California, that some other states have enacted similar laws as well. And that's a positive trend that I see this year, is increase in cannabis users' rights, workers' rights, and
have you had have you had a reasonable amount of clients in the employment law space speaking to you recently about these issues? or are you thinking there's going to be a tsunami of clients over the next sort of 12, 14 months?
Well, I've certainly, we've been alerting our clients about it and blogging about this and making sure. I was with California NORML in Sacramento and we were lobbying to get this bill passed. And so I've certainly been doing my part to spread the word. But I do think there's going to be a lot of folks that don't know. And so there's going to be a period of time where employers are in violation, and that needs to be fixed. And so through more education, speaking on it in podcasts like this, and getting our blog posts out, California NORML has some really great pamphlets that you can give to your employer, or you can look at if you're an employee, just getting the word out about that. And that's always the case when there's a new law passed. It takes a while for the public to learn about it. And unfortunately, not being aware of the law is not a defense for breaking it. So it's important that folks do their part.
No, I mean, obviously with your clients, they're going to be aware of it because that's the sector, but that's only, what, 2% of the California, 1% of the Californian economy. So there's going to be a lot of future work. I mean, look, we rapidly, and we are going to be rapidly covering things. So we've spoken quickly about DUI and employment. What are the other major things that you see on the horizon in the Californian market over the next year? I mean, do you see any trends in particular areas of law that people should be aware of?
Well, yes, I certainly think there's going to be continuing consolidation in the industry. And so if you're an attorney, being familiar with mergers and acquisitions and helping your client either sell or acquire other companies. And so, that's certainly a big part of it. There's also going to be an increase in just civil litigation overall, various types of claims, businesses suing one another essentially over various things, contract disputes, unfair business practices. I think there's going to be a big increase in those types of suits moving forward against licensed and unlicensed operators. There's a new law in California that allows licensees to file a new type of lawsuit against unlicensed operators. So that's another tool in their tool belt. I foresee there being some I do think this year the state will step in and do something about products that are containing other cannabinoids.
So we're onto the hemp issue that's running wildfire through the US at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, and so I think the state's going to do something. They did the Department of Justice did take action against a few hemp operators products in California last year. Believe it or not, legal to sell smokable hemp products in California right now until the state passes a tax on smokable hemp. You can sell smokable cannabis products, but smokable hemp is not technically legal. It's being violated rampantly, but the state chose a few companies to kind of make an example out of, and I think they'll continue to take that approach, although it is difficult for them to do so when they're, as you mentioned, it's just rampant. And so I think part of that is going to have to come in with a federal answer about what is the federal government going to do about CBD products and
What's
all
the federal
that.
government going to do about anything in an election year? Not very much, I should imagine.
It's very tough to say. I don't really think this is high on their priority list at all, despite it being in their docket for quite some time. And a lot of businesses really waiting, and in the meantime, doing whatever they feel like they can get away with. And that's certainly a lot of things happening that I would not advise my clients to do. And I continue to stay involved at the regulatory level and giving my comments as to how ways that we can improve these policies. Here's how things would actually work in the marketplace. And so I think it's important to stay involved because oftentimes the regulators don't understand what it is they're regulating. And we need to provide them with that education so that the policy makes sense that's adopted.
I just want to step back 1 second to a comment you made at the beginning just there about licensed operators being able to use litigation to deal with unlicensed operators. Do you see this as the state's approach to having to spend less money on enforcement and compliance? And how are they dealing with the issue, especially in your part of the world? Because I wanted to go more hyper local with regard to growers, because obviously that's an issue as well. But I mean, there's a lot of unlicensed growers in your part of the world who, without them, the industry wouldn't exist in the first place. So how are they managing that sort of very tricky tightrope or tight wire that people are walking along, and you don't want to fall off either side?
Yeah. Well, I think you raise a really good question as to whether or not this is kind of the state just saying, you guys handle with
You
it
deal with it and you spend the money.
right. In a way that might be part of it, but in the reality is that many of the unlicensed operators would not be good litigation targets anyway. They are often fly-by-night operations that are tough to track down. They might not have any assets. They're not like a company you'd necessarily want to waste your time going after, because there might not be any. I think that it's unrealistic to think that, for the state to think that it can solve all the problems that way. I think what it might be kind of taking the approach that some of these operations will get dealt with via lawsuits from other businesses, and then they'll deal with the ones that have more of a direct environmental impact, or there's some other crimes being committed that would elevate it beyond just
And do you
a code.
think, also, I mean, this is sort of playing devil's advocate. Does this allow some of the larger MSOs to maybe bully some of the smaller mum and pop stores if they can see a way of doing that standard Starbucks thing of, putting theirs on the corner where somebody else was, by analyzing that somebody did a small infraction of some part of very local legislation? I mean, do you see that maybe happening as well? Because that is a particular story in any retail approach to business, especially in F&B, which is not that different to the market we're talking about here.
That certainly is a possibility, and the bigger companies are more well funded and can last longer in litigation fights than a smaller company. So that certainly could happen. My hope is that that is not what happens entirely. I think some of that happening is inevitable, but I do think that the consumer is very educated. The cannabis consumer here in California, and I'm sure elsewhere, they know what they like. They know quality. They've been educated on this for a number of years now, at least, and here in California, we've got, generations of folks that are familiar with cannabis to support local and support smaller businesses.
So they know how to identify the men amongst.
They do. They're pretty good. Most consumers are pretty good at seeing that. So there's going to be a place in the market for that. But they're also just like most products. There's the standard line of products, and then there's the your top shelf line, right? There's the product, the craft product that's for the consumer that's looking for something above and beyond. And that's going to continue to be the case for cannabis. And that is the challenge, I think, right now for a lot of the smaller operators, is getting into
that
that
actually leads me into my next sort of question. Is you're talking about craft operators, and I wanted to talk to you about your local work. So obviously you're in Sonoma. There's been big discussion over the last 5 years about creating the best, like the wine industry that you referred to earlier, creating the best craft producers in the country. Are you finding amongst your clients or new clients that's the sort of business that you're now beginning to develop and really create a template for how things can be done throughout the rest of the state, and I would suggest other jurisdictions around the country?
Yes, to an extent. There have been some roadblocks at the local level that have, I think, held the programs back from realizing their full potential. There were a lot more craft growers here right before legalization and regulation, and not all of them have been able to make it through. And so that has been sad to watch that die off. And these are all small family businesses. And I've seen directly the impacts on these local economies, these local towns where the only industry is cannabis, and you have 75% of the growers go out of business, the town dies. And so this is happening in real time in places in Mendocino County, Humboldt County, Trinity County. And so that has been it's been difficult to watch, but I have been, representing folks that are continuing to push through and to try to get these permits and get these licenses, and we've been successful in doing so, but it hasn't been without a lot of difficult work, a lot of cost, and a lot more inspections than these folks are, which you would, it's nothing that you wouldn't that are out of the realm of to be expected when you're looking at this from the scale of global commercial cannabis operation. But these are small farmers that were growing what used to be a highly illegal plant. And so it's just such a totally different way of life for many of them. And so in many cases, it's the first business they've ever run. And so also dealing with clients in the aspect of helping them set up their first business. So it's not just compliance with the regulations. It's here's a corporation versus an LLC. Here's how you have to have these meetings.
Here's how you have to deal with the IRS.
Exactly. And taxes are a huge problem because the government wants to tax this, even though they don't want to acknowledge that these businesses are doing something that should be legal. So anyway, at the local level, there are, we can talk at length through this, I'm sure, but really to kind of skip ahead, there's some really wonderful craft producers in the Northern California area that I'm in. And there are some that are growing some wonderful genetics that I think will be candidates for the appellations program once California gets its cannabis appellations program off the ground, which it has regulations for and will be launching at some point in the next few years to really bring it to that same level that wine is at when you talk about the different appellations that wine and cheese.
Do you think this is my hope, but do you think Northern California will actually eventually be starting to develop these cannabis companies that grow organically to be world beaters? Because at the moment we've seen a very top-down approach in creating brands, and I'm really hoping to see literally a mom and pop that grow from nothing to becoming a huge US and then international brand when eventually we get round to that, which is 20 years off probably. Do you see the seeds of that beginning to happen with the way that state government, local government, and businesses and people like yourselves as advisors to these businesses working together to create that environment for really good companies to grow and be world beaters?
Oh, absolutely. And California actually has a comparable to organic program for cannabis. They can't call it organic because that word is controlled by the USDA, but it's called the OCal program, and it's through CCOF, and there's some other certifying bodies who do it, but it's essentially like having an organic designation on cannabis. And so it has its own stamp that says OCal, and you can go on the website and see which cannabis companies have been certified OCal. So it means that they're following practices that are as close to organic as possible. They just can't literally call them because of that technicality. And so as soon as federal law changes, I'm sure all those companies will apply to, get USDA organic certification or some other national organic certification, because they already meet those standards by virtue of being in this program.
Well, it's interesting, you say that, because I also know a little about the UK and Australian black market, and they're already illegally marketing themselves as organic Oregon or organic Californian. Obviously the market is there for it. It's the legislators have to allow a little bit more freedom so people, as you say, can work under some sort of federal